Hello, everybody. Thank you for attending this discussion, this Q&A discussion about the British perspective of the Rona story, the Rona disaster, the Rona attack, whatever we want to call it. I will wait a minute before we get started, as people are coming in. But again, thank you. We're about almost 7 years working on this film project. And as a matter of fact, this is a good time before we get started. I just want to introduce my co-producer, Michael Walsh. If you saw those, if you saw the film and you saw all the interviews, it's been about 20 years ago, Michael interviewed the survivors that you saw in the documentary. And we were just talking about it. Michael, you said you never met or interviewed a British survivor. Is that correct?
Yeah, in the early days, I didn't even think of it, honestly, but I would have loved to have had the opportunity to interview any of the British survivors. And now it feels like a big empty hole, but I'm glad our British researchers and Anne had come
Yeah.
together and brought us some really good information for the documentary.
Yeah, the way that all happened was when Anne Good, Michael and I had decided that we didn't have the budget, we didn't have enough money, we didn't have enough energy to start going into the British side of this story. And Anne had contacted me and asked if we were going to include the British part of the story. And I told her, we really can't do it unless you want to do it and help us. And she volunteered to, without any pay or anything, to do the research and join our team. And what she did was so far beyond anything I could have ever imagined. So that if you watch that documentary, the British part of this story would have never come up, especially in that detail. And not only did she contribute to the film, but she went through so much information in the UK and met and found so many people. And did you want to say a word or two about that? Did you actually search the names of all the UK survivors and casualties?
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. Now,
And
for
then you
anybody who
found
hears,
yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
anybody who hears my Canadian accent, I'm a British Canadian, and my father was in the RAF and trained in Canada, which is why the family moved there, mostly Canadian. But this research was done out of Ottawa, where I'm speaking to you today. And it was mostly that I had a group of genealogists, the British Family History Association of Greater Ottawa, who encouraged me to move ahead, and who one day at a Zoom meeting we had, right after Jack had contacted me, we had someone online from London who said, is there any document you want me to look for? Because I'm going to the National Archives. So shortly thereafter, she went to the National Archives, and there was just one file that I had found on the archive site that had mentioned the Rona, and in there was all kinds of information that just opened the door to doing more. So that's how I ended up here, and with that person's collaboration and scanning and whatever, we got information about what had actually happened. But by the same token, I was getting names. I found what happened to my uncle, who was a casualty with the Royal Army Medical Corps, who would have been with Jonathan Edwards' father and Tony Lindsell's father at the time. And we just kept moving ahead. But had I not had that collaboration in London, had I not started to get names and then used as many genealogical tools that I could, we wouldn't have the network that we do, and we wouldn't have the sharing of documentation and photos that I got from the family. So it's been a real collaborative effort.
How many families would you say you actually reached? That
Only about a dozen. I had
out of how
sent,
many?
there were about 200 on board the ship, about 220 on my estimation. Some of them were Indian crew, it's about 100 some of those. So from the group, I mean, we had, let me see, you put me on the spot here,
No, but
numbers.
was the Indian crew, were they British?
Well,
Some of them were.
India didn't get independence until 1947, so yes, they were British, they were Commonwealth.
Yeah. Right.
And even at the end of this story, those casualties, the families were not compensated, even in
Yeah.
1949.
Yeah.
So it took a very, very long time for them to get any
Right.
recognition. So at some point, maybe I can look into the
Yeah, I was
Indian
just
family.
curious how many you were trying to reach. Anyway, well,
Mhm.
let's get started. I'll let everybody introduce themselves, but I'll tell you quickly who's here. Ann Good, who you already met, and Michael Walsh. Marty Bollinger is here. He was the historian. He's a historian and author, and he was also featured in the documentary. Tony Lindsell's here. His father is featured in the documentary, Major Lindsell. And Hugh MacClean is here. He was one of our researchers that Anne found and who had a lot of knowledge and helped us so much with the documentary. So he's part of our team. And Jonathan Edwards, whose father was a Rohna casualty. And they're all, well, not Marty, but they're all, the others are British, part of the British group we have today. So anyway, why don't we just, I'm going to let them all do a little introduction. Keep it short, guys, because we will go to the details of your stories and your family in a little bit. But Tony, why don't you go first?
Okay. Yeah. So my father was Major James Lindsell, and he turned out to be the senior British officer on board. We, as children or adults too, had absolutely no idea of his having been on the Rona or what had happened. Um, the only clue we had in hindsight was that he'd said he, to my recollection, had been on his way to Sicily and his ship had sunk and he was in the water for a while. And my sister says there was an old khaki ragged T-shirt that he wore in the water, but I don't remember seeing it. But the first we knew about the Rona was I was recovering from a knee operation and I got an email from this person called Anne Good, who's in front of you, saying, "Are you related to Major James Lindsell?" Yeah, I'm his son. And she then proceeded to tell us, the family, the whole story. And of course, we were absolutely intrigued. She'd found me because, as a family, we'd given a picture of a Hertfordshire local picture where we'd lived to the local museum. And Anne had contacted the museum, and they said, "Well, there's this guy called Lindsell who gave us a picture," and and they had my email and made that connection. So the whole thing has been an absolute adventure for us and has led us also not just to learn about the Rona, but to read in detail all my father's letters to my mother, which were completely voluminous
Yeah.
and enlightened us about a whole lot more
Yeah.
about his
So you had
experiences during the war.
you had context of those letters now after you
Yeah,
learned so much
absolutely.
from Anne.
Absolutely.
What did you think when you realized you didn't even know the Rona existed and this whole thing happened, and then your father is featured in the documentary?
Well, it's as Michael said, he wished he'd interviewed some of the um, British
Yeah.
people. I mean, I was a journalist at one time. I wish I'd interviewed my own father. So, there's this
Yeah.
whole world of his life that we have absolutely no knowledge of.
Great
And
story.
he didn't, in his letters, he's just completely, because presumably he was under instruction not to say anything, his references are just completely vague.
Well, that was not unusual. Same thing happened here. People followed those. Saul Gorman told me, I followed orders, even through his whole life. And that's something. We'll get back to that, Tony. Marty, just tell everybody who you are, and they probably know you already. Marty's featured in the documentary. Just tell a little background about yourself.
Yeah, I'm in my spare time and in retirement, I write books on maritime and naval history, and this is the one I wrote 15 years ago. And it's about the dual conflict that was taking place. The warrior side we know about is the ships and the airplanes and the victims and such. But there was an equally important fight going on behind the scenes with the intelligence agencies and the scientists. And the reason why I'm intrigued by Rona is it played an absolutely pivotal role in each of those conflicts, not just at sea, but also in developing capabilities to defeat the weapons. So that's the story I tell in the book.
Well, you were a great help to making this documentary. I'm always so thankful. Jonathan's dad was a casualty. What a story. What a story.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my father was the senior medical officer on the ship. And in fact, Anne's uncle was one of his orderlies. So they worked together. I have always known a little about the circumstances of my father's passing and the ship. But to be honest, I didn't know the name of the ship until I started researching it on the internet about 25 years ago, I suppose, by which time, sadly, my mother had died. And so I knew far more about it by then than she ever knew, because all she knew was what she'd been told at the time. And that was very little, despite the fact that she wrote to the War Office, she wrote to the captain and to the third officer, both of whom wrote back to her eventually when they were allowed to, but that was 6 months after the sinking. And then I found in my mother's possessions all of the letters that my father had written to her, and also the exchange of telegrams from the War Office, the casualty process that was gone through and all that, which is fairly distressing when you read that and you look at the intervals. They were actually told for the first time that he was missing at sea on Christmas Eve. Can you believe? That was a month after the sinking, then the procedure went on, and he was finally confirmed as a casualty in March of 1944. So, and all that time there was this doubt and missing at sea and whatever that meant, and despite the fact that the War Office knew damn well that nobody had survived.
Same story yeah. We have. The only difference is that the U.S. War Department decided not to tell the families till after the holiday. And I always believed that was on purpose. The telegram started coming in on the 28th, 29th, 30th, the first week of January. But your mother received hers on Christmas Eve.
Yeah.
And I don't know if that's the case. I always figured that they at least.
Yeah, exactly. It was dated December the 24th.
Yeah, right.
There's a real lack of sensitivity there.
Yeah, really. Well, we'll get back to you. And the last one I wanted to bring up is Hugh MacClean, and he was a researcher on the film, one of Anne's close supporters or helpers in the research. And Hugh, if you just tell us a little bit about your background, and then we'll understand why you joined us on the film.
Well, thanks for inviting me, and I'm grateful to be here and to be able to put the British side, the merchant navy side of it, especially. I've been involved. I have no personal interest, family interest to the Rhona. But as a Merchant Navy researcher, I think I first saw a post online. I think it was by yourself, Jack, which I responded to because I wanted to make sure that the Merchant Navy, which is my interest mainly, it was properly acknowledged in your film. And we exchanged emails, and you put me in touch with Anne. And from then on in, me and Anne, we collaborated on a lot of things to do with the Merchant Navy, to do with the military gunners on board the ship. Anne had received a lot of documents from the National Archives in Kew, which made my job really easy. The difficult part of it with being a researcher is, you need to have the documents. And I live up here in the north of Scotland, long away from London, and the documents I didn't have access to. But Anne was able to get hold of them, and she showed me them, and I was able to go through the lists of the crew and of the gunners and make sure that we tried to establish just who exactly was on board the ship, who might have signed off, and and it was very difficult actually because the crew list was incomplete, and we had to work out exactly who was on board, and we had to make a certain guesstimate as to who may have still been on board or may not have been on board. But Anne has documented all that in her report, and it's there for everybody to see. So hopefully we've done a good enough job, but we're open to take any questions about the Merchant Navy. For me, I'm quite happy to take questions about the Merchant Navy and the gunners. I'll leave the history stuff to Marty and Anne. But yeah, that's where I am. I'm very pleased that you made the film. I enjoyed the film. I enjoyed watching it. I agree with Michael. I wish we would have got British representative on the film just to give that perspective. But it was a US tragedy, and I understand exactly that we're dealing with the US side of it. But thanks for making the film, and thanks, Anne, for getting involved with the British research. And I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Hugh. Okay, last is my wife, Barbara. Barbara, why don't you explain what we're going to do? We're going to start talking a little more about different parts of this story, and Barbara is going to explain to you what we're doing, because you can ask questions. This is a Q&A, so if questions come up, well, Barb, tell them. This is my wife, Barbara. She's executive producer
Sure.
of the film.
In name only. If anyone has participated in any of our previous Q&As, it'll work pretty much the same way. So we encourage you to ask questions. If there's anything on your mind, just put the question in the chat, and then I'll go through the chat and sort of direct questions to the people that I know that I think will answer them, or I'll give it back to you, Jack, and then you can figure it out.
Okay, sounds good. Let's get started with this. Hugh, you have brought up the Merchant Navy is what you're specializing in your research. Could you explain a little bit what the Merchant Navy is and how it related to the Rhona? Because it's a really important part of understanding how the Rhona got into this situation, and we don't cover it much in the documentary. Matter of fact, I learned just the most about it from you in your research. You want to share a little bit of that for the people that don't even know what the Merchant Navy is?
Right. So the SS or the HMT Rohna was a troop ship that was requisitioned by the Admiralty to ferry troops back and forward. That was its main job. And basically, the Merchant Navy is a civilian service. Okay, so it's quite complicated how it fits into the wartime scene. There's many things going on there. You have military people who are making decisions. They've got ship owners who owned the ships, and the crews were civilians, and you had military people as well, all trying to get involved. But basically, the Merchant Navy was, in 1939, the British Merchant Navy was the predominant sea power. The UK Royal Navy especially was the military power, and the British Merchant Navy and Commonwealth was the civilian power. And we had the biggest merchant navy in the world at that time. It all changed, size-wise, as the war progressed and the US took over. But basically, a civilian service. By the end of the war, the attrition rate with regards to the military and the merchant navy was huge. The merchant navy lost more men per capita than the military, and that was the same for the U.S. merchant marine as well, I believe. So they never really got the credit that they deserved for the job that they did, all around the world.
Hugh, do you consider the captain of the ship and the laster crew? They signed an agreement with the government, a T-124, I believe it was called, and got paid as a service. But do you also consider them as heroes, just like you would of a soldier? In other words, did the captain have to be part of this, or is he kind of volunteered? Because it was very dangerous, and they knew that going into it. So I always wondered whether they would be considered same as the military as far as risking their lives. And did they have a choice to join that or not? To join, to be on the Rohna, like the crew?
Well, first of all, they didn't sign a T-124 agreement. The T-124 agreement was basically an agreement that the crew would sign if the ship was being taken over, requisitioned by Admiralty, and basically what would happen there would be the crew would be subject to Royal Navy discipline. Effectively, the ship would be run by the Royal Navy. Now, that wasn't the case for the Rohna. The Rohna was requisitioned, but she, as a troop ship, but she did not have an HMS type title. She wasn't Her Majesty's ship. Okay, she was a civilian transport, and run on merchant navy lines. So yeah, the captain and the crew were as brave as any military person, and they took the same risks, didn't they?
Yeah.
Yeah. And but the merchant navy crew, they would sign on the ship for the voyage, and they would sign off on completion, and that's how it kind of worked for all the way through the war. They signed on, they signed off, they signed on, they signed off different ships.
Yeah.
And they were.
I just thought that I was wondering if they deserve the credit as a soldier would, because they went into this situation knowing that this could happen, and they should get that kind of credit, I would think.
They certainly deserved the credit.
Yeah.
And my feeling is that they didn't get the credit they deserved. Maybe they were highlighted during the war, that they were a vital service, and the civilian population knew that. Everybody knew that. But at the end of the war and afterwards, I think they were quickly forgotten. The merchant navy were forgotten, and it was relatively recent that they were accepted into the mainstream. And when we have Remembrance Sunday here, you'll have Veterans Day, and there'll be Anzac Day in New Zealand and Australia, and the Canadians had it as well. But the merchant navy were never allowed to march. with the military on Remembrance Day until fairly recently. And
Really?
that tells me that, you know, there was a lot going on from 1945 on the way, whereby the British Merchant Navy was just completely forgotten. And it was the military, they were always to the fore, and rightly so. But the Merchant Navy should have been there too, for the sacrifices that they made from the very beginning to the very end.
I always thought that when I was putting this film together and learning about the Merchant Navy, and these were volunteers and put their lives at risk just like everybody else. And I kind of felt that what you just explained was the case. You know, there's an interesting thing that we've been talking about. It's not in the documentary, and that is the part that the impact that the D-Day training had on why the ship was even used. I don't know, Anne, if you want to start with that, and then we'll bring Marty in. He might want to give us some background on that. But you brought that to our attention.
Yes, one of the documents that I referenced was the National Archives Rohna movement card. So you could see where the Rohna had been. Now, in the early days, they had gone from based mostly in Bombay, South Africa, through the Straits, through the Mediterranean. But by the time they reached early 1943, they were much more based in the Mediterranean, and then that trip back to Bombay. So I can imagine when when the Ministry of War Transport was looking for ships that would be suitable to take the U.S. troops, and that was an early contingent under the China-Burma India Initiative, that it would make sense. You've got two ships, the Rohna and its sister ship, the Rajala, built the same year, 1926, that had been plying those waters and that route for decades. Surely, regardless of what level of maintenance they were in, they might be suitable candidates. And one thing I also mentioned in my research was the last time I saw a maintenance record for the Rohna was in June of 1943. Alexandria was usually their point of call if they weren't in Bombay. And at that point, guess what? It was a month before the Sicily landings, and I wanted the British families to know that although, of course, your story of the American troops starts when they load on November 25th, there were a number of them, including the Army contingent and a few gunners and a number of the Merchant Navy who had been around on the ship since 1942, who did participate. It was not the first wave, it was the second wave. Sicily landing started on July the 9th, and the Rohna was there with this contingent on the 13th. So one would have thought that following that, that there would have been another call for maintenance, but I don't know. I've looked so many places. I've written to Lloyd's just to find out, and they did not respond to me. So in that sense, I have no idea really what happened in terms of the maintenance of the Rohna from July to November.
Marty, you want to add anything to that as far as the condition of them that ship being used having to do with of other ships being used for preparation for D-Day? Is that something you have?
Yeah, a little bit, just real quick. I mean, we were transferring the USI, transferring troops to the China-Burma India theater. And that was always a theater of secondary importance. The primary importance, the Americans, was always going to be going to be Northern Europe, the invasion of France. And for the British, it was the Mediterranean. And so, to some extent, the journeys to the China-Burma India theater got the left side hand-me-downs for the ships that were available. And I think that's one of the reasons they dragged whatever they could into the fleet and assigned it specifically to that mission.
Okay. The British, I'm curious if the U.S. survivors are very clear in stating that there were bad conditions on the Rona. Of course, the lifeboats not working, the life belts overcrowded, and they will all talk about that. Michael will tell you that that's what one of their biggest things they talk about when they talk about the Rona. I don't know who would want to answer this, but does the British have that same feeling on that side as far as survivors go, which would be, well, Tony, you didn't talk to your father about it. But does anybody want to add anything from the British side as whether they look down on this ship of being unsuitable for that particular journey?
Hi, Jack.
Oh, somebody wants to. Elizabeth,
Hugh,
do you want to say something?
Yes, I have my dad's letters um, during World War II, including ones from the Rona. And he wrote from Bombay that he hadn't been on such a good ship before. So he had in 1942, I think it was, he wrote, "This is a good ship." But admittedly, he was an officer, so he had a cabin. And I'm aware that the troops would have been probably in the hold in hammocks. But from his point of view, I feel the Rona was a good ship. And I'm just going by his letter.
Yeah, and tell us a little bit more about this. Is your dad? He
My
was on.
dad, he was
He
the
was a
third
survivor
wireless officer on the
on the
Rona.
uh, when it
On
was attacked.
and he was on the Rona when it was attacked. And thanks to Anne, I have the letter that he, not the letter, the report that he wrote, which he had to write after the bombing. So thank you, Anne, for this information which came from the archive in Kew. So, my dad had specific things to do when the bomb fell. And he did mention that, he tried to lower the lifeboat that he had responsibility for, but it wasn't lowering. And he also said that men would climb into lifeboats, and there were too many men going into the lifeboats, and then they would tip over. So it was a pretty horrible situation to be in. And eventually he had to climb down netting, which was lowered over the side, and he swam to safety to the minesweeper. And thanks to Anne again, I got that information from the report of the first officer. And it took them half an hour in a very heavy sea to swim to the minesweeper. So, and my dad didn't talk about this. I know it was everything, you weren't supposed to talk about it, but he must have mentioned to his parents that he'd been in the water. And he said to me, because when I was young, I once asked him, was your ship ever attacked? And he just said, well, we were torpedoed, and then he changed the subject. And I was young, so I didn't ask any more. But as a consequence of being, in oily water, he then developed type 1 diabetes. And he was invalided out of the Merchant Navy in August 1944. He was in hospital in Alexandria. And I actually believe that was linked to the Rona bombing,
How long
because
was he
I
in the water?
believe that type 1 diabetes can start if there is an inflammation, if there is infection in the pancreas. And when I read Carlton Jackson's book, well, he swam to safety. He swam for half an hour in
So
a
he
heavy
was only
sea,
in the water
and
for
that was
half an
thanks
hour.
to a
Yeah.
report I got from Anne.
Wow.
Um, and Carlton Jackson's book said guys were covered in oil, as if it was half an hour. Half an hour he swam to
Yeah.
safety. And I actually think it was because of his childhood. He swam from Orkney, they went to the beach in the summer. He was a good swimmer. But not all men could swim. And of course, there was the problem with the life belts, which I believe the American life belts, which they hadn't put on properly and they drowned upside down, which was awful, just absolutely awful.
But did your
But
father
my
have
dad,
any?
he somehow blotted it out. He didn't talk about it, which I think a lot of men at that time did. They
Well, the
wouldn't talk
British
about it.
didn't use the British, from what I understand, didn't use
Yes.
life belts.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, it looks like you froze up here. Yeah, it's just a little bit. You're cutting in and out. But the British had regular life preservers. Isn't that right, Anne?
Yeah.
But anybody else want to add to that? Tony, were you going to say something? Was just curious about this. I mean, the U.S. survivors are adamant about this condition of the ship. And it's interesting to hear what the British were saying. Go ahead, Tony.
Well, just reading my father's report the couple of days afterwards, I think the report's in the film. Reading it again this afternoon, I just noted again that he in his report, he says he attributes part of the problem with the lifeboats that he says a lot of them were affected by the initial explosion, the actual mechanism. So I suspect, some of them were working. We know some of them were working because we know that my father and one of the merchant navy officers, maybe Elizabeth's father, actually went out in the boat in one or two of the lifeboats on little fishing or whatever expeditions in the days before it set sail. So some were certainly working. But then you look at the interviews in the film, the gentleman who was bashing his helmet against the rust. I suspect there were some that were working, some were damaged in the explosion, and some were rusty. Who knows?
Marty, did you have any thoughts on that? From you, I know you read all the interviews from the U.S. soldiers.
I think we need to separate lifeboats from life rafts. I think the lifeboats, some of them appeared to have failed when they hit the water. So they may have been a structural issue, but in my opinion, the main issue was people didn't know how to lower them properly, and the machinery was not allowing them to lower them easily. And maybe if they'd been highly trained, they could have done it, but they weren't the professional seamen on the ship. Did their best, but there are a number of stories about how one end gets dropped first, it hits the water, and the lifeboat's upside down. So I think the lack of effective training, the chaos of the situation, and machinery, davits and such that was not always in good repair is a major contributing factor here.
Yeah. Jonathan, when we had our meeting yesterday, we got together for a few minutes. Did you mention that there's a memorial in the UK for the Rohna?
No, not a memorial for the Rohna. There is near where I live, Brookwood Cemetery, which is it's a huge cemetery outside Woking, and they have a military section. And in the military section, there is a specific memorial to the missing who have no known grave. And there are, my father's name is there, and uncle's name is there under RAMC, and it's all categorized by regiment. So there are two or three of the Rohna casualties there because of their association with the fact that there's no known grave. And I think there are 3,500 names on that memorial.
Do you?
Jack, excuse me,
Yeah.
Ann Good had something to say, and we have some questions too. So
Oh,
just so you
raise
know.
the hand thing, yeah.
Yeah, okay. And we have some questions also, just so you know.
Okay, if we want to move the conversation, I might want to say one thing real quick, and then we will get to them, Barb. Okay, but go
Okay,
ahead.
and okay.
Can I also just add something about the lifeboats and the drills before
Sure.
you get there, Jack? Would you mind?
Not at all. Go ahead, please.
Okay. We noticed that there, according to Major Lindsell, that there were 3 lifeboat drills. The idea was that the men would be told to which lifeboat station that they were assigned, and that they would wait for to be called to that station, and the Lascars were responsible for helping them lower the boats. And my understanding is that the Lascars panicked, even if they were responsible for lowering those boats. A lot of them panicked and couldn't do it, and it became chaos. The other point was that the British authorities said later on, we know it wasn't the best option to have them wait until they were told to go to their assigned positions, but it was the best under the circumstances. So they recognized that there were gaps in the way that was handled. So I just wanted to add that.
Yeah, got it. Did you and then Barb will get to the questions. I'm
Sure.
just curious, is the UK going to, or do you, as your mission, Anne, to still get this story out, just like it's our mission to get it out here, and we're struggling, believe me. We finally just got a deal where we're going to get onto PBS and get some national exposure, hopefully starting Memorial Day week. But we have an agreement for 3 years, so it'll go into different stations throughout the country, different markets at different times throughout the next few years. But it's been very hard here. So what is your vision, hopes, and plans, or what are you doing now to get this story, and the rest of the panel as well, if they want to add anything?
In my case, over the last 4 years, I have sent out messages to press, to military associations, even genealogical societies. We were interviewed, as you may recall, in 2002 by Family Tree DNA in the UK, and we were hoping that we would find people who were researching their ancestors there too, but nothing has come out. So I'm sending out an appeal to everyone. We'll keep bombarding any possible contacts with information about this, but whatever contacts you think you have that might further the story, we'd love that. I mean, it's really hard because so few people really have a place to grieve. There were no graves. There was only one body that was identified and buried, and 3 others in the region were buried, 2 in Italy, 1 in Tunisia, and 1 in Algeria, so 4. But apart from that, no one had anywhere to go as a memorial. As John Edwards says, they're not identified by Rohna or where. So it's very hard to find them, and it's very difficult to, I don't know, grab attention these days. Even if anybody's got any contact with the Second World War Research Group at King's College London, we sent them messages again saying, are you interested? So I don't know, but I'm really determined to keep trying to find more visibility and recognition.
You did a great job. I saw some of the things you've been doing, and I'm doing this. We're doing the same thing here, and it's discouraging, isn't it? But we'll keep fighting. All right, Barb, you want to? Did anybody want to add to that about the UK and getting publicity and getting the story out?
I did make an attempt to send some stuff to the Imperial War Museum about 18 months ago and didn't even get a response. Maybe I should have gone in person. I also, close to where I live, there is a small museum for the Royal Army Medical Corps, to which my father belonged. And I went along to them and they said, no, we're not interested in that because it wasn't a hospital ship. We're only interested in hospital ships.
Yeah. For years. Barb, go ahead.
Sure. Okay, so from Bronwyn, she asked, were the Merchant Navy families informed of the casualties, also informed by the War Office in that case? And I would just add to that, I'm a little unclear who actually the Merchant Navy was. So you mentioned, Jack, it's the captain and the Lascar crew, but what about like Jonathan's dad and Anne's uncle? As medical personnel, were they just on the transport like the rest of the soldiers,
Well,
or were they
Army.
part of the
They were Army,
army?
Yeah.
Okay.
and the gunners were Royal Navy. And then there was a merchant navy. I just looked at my numbers because I was a bit unclear when we first started, but there were only 13 Army people, and the War Office had these files that we saw. But when we started looking merchant navy, there are a number that we couldn't trace, but there must have been about 50-ish people there on our list, and 25 of the Royal Navy. So files were divided up, and that's why it's hard for me to find things. So War Office had the information on the Navy people, on the Army people. Admiralty had information on the Navy people, and the Board of Trade had Merchant Navy information, but it kind of overlapped with the Admiralty files. And the only a really interesting file that I found was a blow-by-blow account as people were being rescued. So it was the Navy and the Merchant Navy, they were included in that list, but the War Office Army details were not. So it was a little hard to track this down, but no, there were three different services
Gotcha.
involved.
Gotcha.
So,
And I would go to Hugh. I was going to say, Hugh, you answered Bronwyn's question in the chat. So maybe if you just wanted to elaborate on that a little further.
yeah, I haven't seen any particular correspondence regarding the Rona families in our research, but in general, when a ship sunk or was torpedoed, the shipping company did make an effort to send telegrams to the families. So I've personally seen the telegrams, and you know, it, they were good at doing that. I mean, they did that as routine, just a general letter offering their condolences, etc. But I didn't see anything particular to the Rona. In regards to what Anne was saying about the crew, the Board of Trade looked after the Merchant Navy. The gunners, the military gunners, were also part of the crew, right? So you had your Army team that was on board as part of the ship's attachment, the medics and the others that Anne was referring to. But the military gunners, the Royal Navy, there were 16 Royal Navy gunners, and there was 2 Maritime Royal Artillery gunners from the Army, okay? So 18 in total, and they were all part of the crew. Just the way these things worked, that the Army and the Navy detachments were always part of they signed the Articles of Agreement, which was basically which puts them onto the crew list. So they were always classed as members of the crew, but the medics were not part of the crew. They were part of a ship's detachment.
Gotcha. Okay. Go ahead, Jack. Did you want to
No,
say
I was going to
something?
ask you another question, Barb.
Yes. So L is asking, what happened to the killed Rona and any personal effects?
Say that again.
So I guess the casualties, what happened to their personal effects?
They're at the bottom of the sea.
I was going to say that, but I didn't.
Yeah, I know it's sad.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah.
again, I know we've talked about this previously, but we really, at some point, as a casualty family, want to get a diver to go down there and to find the ship. So that it to me is a personal goal, and a lot of the other casualty families. So
And
We do have some men that have come to the reunions with their life belts, and John Feevett had a watch and there's a canteen that's out there that we're all there for the sinking, but those were items that were on the men themselves. All their
The
personal
survivors.
items went down
Yeah.
with the ship.
Well, hopefully we get some exposure from the documentary. We'll find somebody who wants to dive down there and film or whatever they do, and try to bring a little more closure to the families, and we can learn more. It would be the most important thing for me to see happen. The other thing that after we did one of these with U.S. casualty families, and we had come to the conclusion after the meeting of, I think Barb and I was talking about it, and then some others were interested, is maybe one time we can, as a group, all the casualty families or any Rona families would want to go to visit the place where this all happened. Not only the memorial at the what is it, the North African American Cemetery, where all the names are on the wall, but even I heard somebody did this once, and not for the Rona, but for somebody else. But they went out on a ship. Not even a ship, it was just a boat, because it was only 15 miles off the coast, and they went out to where the attack happened and had a memorial. And after working on this for 6 or 7 years, and I know how much this means to so many people, this whole thing, had family on the ship. It's just wonder if that's something that would be that we're at least talking about doing, and if we go further with that, we'll let everybody know. But go ahead, Barb.
Okay. So Irish Bee's iPad is saying, thank you so much for doing this. I really don't have a question, but would like to make a comment, especially to Jonathan, and she's located in the US. So Irish, are you there?
Oh yeah, you're unmute, just unmute. We can't hear you. You have to click that little button on the top right of your screen. I think it says unmute. See unmute, little blue button, I think it is. No, you don't see it? Is that what? We can't hear you.
Mine appears on the bottom left, and it's a
Oh, okay.
microphone with a red slash through it.
Oh,
Yeah,
that's right.
same
That's
here.
right.
You're the administrator, Jack. I
Yeah,
think
and
it's
mine's
different.
up, right.
Bottom left.
Bottom left. There's a red mic with a line through it. It's a red little icon right next to your name. Do you see your name? You got to click it with your mouse, right? Roll, not with your hand, with your mouse. Yay!
Yay!
I don't have a mouse.
Oh, I see.
I
That's
just
why
have a
you're
big
here.
fat
Well,
finger.
that's good to know. Go ahead.
I hope I can keep this together. As an American, I'm truly ashamed of our country in every way. I'm so sorry that it's such a mess and that they behave so badly, particularly to my dearest cousin, Jonathan, who I haven't seen for years and who's right there, and I'm looking at him. And I just want to tell you I love you, Jonathan. And again, I wish this was a better country. It should have been. I'm really sorry.
Wow.
Thank you.
Well, thank you for sharing that with him. Jonathan, it's been a long time since you saw your cousin.
Yeah, indeed.
Yeah. And do you remember, Irish, do you remember when all of this happened? Because it was part of your family, or not? You have no memories? Maybe?
No.
Yeah.
Not until Jonathan got me in touch with all of you and the film and the.
Oh, really?
I have the DVD and yeah. No.
Thank
Well,
you.
thank you for that. Yeah. Go ahead, Barbie.
And Catherine, hi, Catherine, just said apparently Churchill Archives has no records related to the Rona disaster, which is just one more sad thing to add to the list.
Is there any place that is recognizing the Rona in the UK? Any museums or institutions or government? Nothing. Zero, huh?
not at all.
Mm. Do the World War II historians or people who have a lot of interest in this, are they excited when they hear about it, or are they just, everybody's just passing on it? It's not. Why, Anne? Is that because there were it was a British ship?
I know, but there wasn't a lot of British personnel on it. And when you add up the few numbers and the fact that each individual family was told that they'd either the casualty families were notified, and there were survivors who wouldn't talk. That's a small number of people, and unless there's some anchor to bring that information together, I can see why it got lost.
Yeah. Oh, almost got lost here. So, Barbie, another.
Okay. So this is so amazing and overwhelming. Thank you all for speaking out and working so hard. Your family members are proud, and our family members appreciate your time and efforts so very much. That's very humbling. Thank you very much for saying that. Jay Good is saying, I think we have to understand there would be a difference in what one would consider acceptable between the British and the Americans. Does anyone want to sort of weigh in on that?
It's my brother. Maybe he can speak.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, hi there. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, actually, I think what it is, the real perception of what is acceptable or not. England at that time, all the whole British Isles, they were really, really trying to cobble anything and everything together. If the plane got off the ground, it was worthy. If the boat floated, it was great. My father, who was a pilot, would often say that he was really amazed that the American crews, they actually had safety equipment, whereas he didn't. So when they got to the Rona, it floated, it seemed to be good. That's it. It's a war effort. We're going with it. The Americans, well, obviously they came over. They could see the destruction and everything else in Britain, all the really hardships. You came from nice homes to real destitute country in many respects. So the perception of what is good may be different between the British and the Americans, simply because the British become, kind of an expression, nose blind, where you start to lose that perception of what should be other than what has to be. So the ship could do the job because it had to, rather than maybe this isn't the most safe.
Yeah, very good point.
Good point.
I know what you mean.
Okay. Thank you. And Bronwyn says a memorial at sea would be very moving, and she's Jonathan's daughter, Major Richmond Edwards' granddaughter. So we will definitely keep you posted on that. I don't know if anyone was on our last Q&A with Assemblyman Ramos and Glenn Close and Wood Newton, but Assemblyman Ramos is really excited to try and put something together. So, maybe it'll take someone of his level and status to try and get this whole process started. So we're looking forward to that. And then we have Janice. Hi, Janice. She says there are no archives in the FDR library either. So add that to the list. And then Carolyn is saying, I hope the special relationship between our countries will be restored in the near future. And I think that's probably the goal of all of us. So thank you, Carolyn. And I think that's it, Jack, so far.
Okay.
And we're coming up on time, just so you know. It's 1:57.
So we did pretty good then. Is there anybody from the panel, at least, even that wanted to say something or is thinking of something they might have wanted to mention in these last few minutes before we finish up? Tony, go ahead.
Yeah, I think one thing that is maybe not missed out, but is is slightly in the background in all of this was that it's clear from my father's letters that the Rhona played a pretty big part in the Sicily landings, going backwards and forwards, collecting men, delivering them. And we know Jonathan's father and mine were involved in that, probably Elizabeth's father as well. And it was clear that the Rhona in that function was functioning fine as an effective vessel. So you know, the shortcomings, it saw action, but not obviously wasn't hit at that time. But you know, it was doing an important job as a military vessel effectively at the time.
Yeah, and if it didn't get attacked, it would have gotten there just fine and did its job.
I think that's right. And sadly, my father wasn't quite as reticent as, well, he's much more reticent than Tony's father and much more aware of the censor, because his letters didn't even show that he'd been to Sicily to the landings, although he got the Italy star, so I know he was. But he didn't talk about it at all. But you're right, the Rhona did play an important part there. One thing I'd just like to say, which we mentioned, Jack, the day before yesterday when we had our small chat, was one of the positive things that came out of it was that Eisenhower decreed that no US personnel would go to sea with inappropriate life jackets again, as a result of what they learned from the Rhona, with the life belts being inadequate. And that, we believe, helped considerably.
But the life belts were used for D-Day, and the same thing happened there.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Marty had to leave. He had an appointment to get to. I wish he was here. But, and isn't that correct? So,
yeah, that's what he told us. Yes.
Are you familiar, Jonathan, with that? What you just said, is that documented
maybe I misread that. I thought that he put out some instruction that, and I thought that was in Anne's report.
He did.
Maybe
he did, but it didn't work.
After D-Day, though, right?
Yeah, but it didn't work.
Yeah. So the shame of that whole thing is that during the training for D-Day, and maybe even during D-Day, I don't know if it was both, but soldiers died using the life belts because they were top heavy, the weight of the gear they were carrying, their feet went up, their heads went down, and they drowned. So anyway, that was another shame of that. So that was interesting that you said that, and Anne, maybe we'll tell me a little more about that another time. Jonathan, one other thing I wanted to ask you is, we're wrapping up. When did you, what was it like to find out how your father died, and when did you find out? How did your mother tell you? How old were you? Do you have memories of that?
Oh, I guess that when I was 5 or 6 years old, I certainly was aware that he had been killed in the war. And I think I knew that he was on a ship that was attacked. I have to say that my father spent a lot of time on troop ships. The Rhona was actually the 4th or 5th ship that he was on. And we have a lot of documentation of that. But so, yeah, I was probably 5 or 6 years old when she told me as much as she knew. I now know much more than she ever knew.
Yeah. That's how it was in a lot of cases.
Yeah.
Is there anybody else, Hugh, anything you wanted to add to our conversation? Oh, Anne, either of you, Hugh first, did you want to say anything last?
Yeah, just quickly, I'm really quite glad that the film talked about Dochterman himself, and I just want to say I was really touched when Sean Dochterman came to me and he said, "Would you like to read my father's documentation?" And here we had a very different history. I mean, I was the daughter of an RAF bomber pilot myself, and here's someone from the enemy camp coming to give me his grandfather's document. He said, "When you're finished with them, you can send them back to me." And I thought it was kind of nice to bring that together in a way that yes, we had common points in history, but we weren't we didn't belong to such different camps after all in the bigger picture of things. So I just wanted to mention that.
Yeah.
I would just like to say, with regard to the video, the film, one of the poignant things that I remember from it was 5 minutes from the end, where Mrs. Darlene Berube, she was on screen and talked about, what these veterans did for their country, and how they were told to keep everything secret, and how she wished their country had been better to the veterans. I thought that was very poignant, and it stays with me, that, because
good.
in my line of research work, that's what I remember about these men and women. They did what they could for their country, but their country didn't always support them.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And Michael, we know Darlene was one of our favorite people, right? And what a sweet, sweet person. And we were lucky enough to meet her. And she has a really, her story hits home when she was sitting there with her husband watching a movie, and all of a sudden a ship blew up, and next thing you know, he says, "But that happened to me." And that just makes me cry every single time I watch it. I've only watched it 152 times, but
Barb, I think a question just came in about the life belts. Did you see that?
yes, I do.
Why don't you
There's a
read
couple more. Could we,
read
do
that?
we have time?
Well,
Were the life jackets inadequate, or were they not told how to use them, is the question.
Yeah, Michael, I figured that'd be a good question for you since you've spoke to so many survivors.
Yeah, it's kind of both. I mean, some of the men knew how to use them, but I don't think there was generally well trained on how to use the belts. If they wore them as a belt, then they were in trouble. They had to wear them up under their armpits. And I know I spoke to Al Stefanoni, and he had made the mistake of having it as a belt. He jumped in the water, he flipped upside down, but he was able to rectify that. But most, if they had made that mistake, it was too late. There were even, you got to remember, these are young guys running around doing stupid stuff. Now and then, before the incident, guys would sneak up behind other guys and inflate their life belts as a joke. Well, the thing is, there weren't refills for the CO2 cartridges. So it wasn't a death sentence because you could blow them up by using your mouth. But I imagine some died because somebody had played that trick. So I think it was both.
Barb, let's knock out a couple quick questions.
Yeah, okay.
Anybody wrote questions?
Here's one more technical one. So from Ron Koenig, from viewing the video, survivors said that they were the only ship without a barrage balloon. Did the Rona lose theirs in other conflicts? That may have been a Marty question.
Yeah, well, I'll say this. I've read that, and I'm not so sure that is definitely true. I think there's a lot of things that were said by people that there's really no other evidence of that I know. I'll let Michael jump in when I'm done, but I know when I start hearing things like that, if I can't prove it, and I think what happens in history in general, especially on the Rona story, is one person can say something that the next person hears and the next person hears, and it becomes a fact, or at least it becomes a rumor. Michael, do you believe that that was because it's just so odd that
I know, especially on it was a good sized convoy, but I'd like to point out it wouldn't have mattered. I mean, the way the missile came in, the barrage balloon would not have stopped it anyway.
Exactly.
So
it was just another way to say the Rona was not prepared for this or was not in good condition. Another thing against the Rona, and I think you're right, Michael. Barb, next one.
So Ron Koenig also said, FYI, my grandmother was told that he died in the sinking of his ship in an Italian harbor. And his, I guess, grandfather, Clarence Creamer Jr., was in the 31st Signal Construction Battalion, which is, fun fact, the same that my great uncle was in. So nice to meet you, Ron. And Janice is also saying Al Stefanani could not swim. So the poor guy had the belt in the wrong place and couldn't swim and still survived. So good on him, right?
If you want to hear his story, it's in the documentary. He
That's
tells that
right.
story. Yeah. Any more, Barb?
Then we have Rachel Norad saying, I concur with what's already been said. Thank you so much for your diligence and hard work. Thank you, Rachel. And Elizabeth is saying thank you to everyone who's been working hard to get this disaster more widely known. This has been a very interesting hour with you all. Thank you very much. We appreciate you all joining us. It's a labor of love for every person on this screen, and we've been living this for the last 6 years. So we sincerely appreciate all of your support, and we could not have done this without all of you.
Okay, I guess we're just about done then. I just want to leave everybody with, if you have not joined our email list to stay updated on things that are happening, make sure you go to our website. I think it's at the bottom, and then there's a link to click, or maybe it even asks you when you go to it. But there is a place where you can sign up for our newsletters that will update you on things we're going to do in the future, and our Facebook page. And there's a critical time for us. So anything you could do to spread the word and keep sharing our posts and telling people, and especially when we get onto PBS. And I should ask another thing with the panel here. If you have any ideas on how we can get distribution in the UK, please let me know. If you haven't thought about it, think about it, whether it's public television or BBC or whatever you have there. It's always, if a filmmaker goes to somebody and wants them to run their show or get publicity, they just think, well, you're just promoting your film. But if a person who had a family member on the Rona contacts anybody, for that matter, that you get a little bit more chances something might come from it. So keep that in mind.
And May 12th, Jack, you might want to mention that for anyone who's in the US.
Yeah, on May 12th, we're doing in Albany, New York. We're having a presentation there with the assemblyman in the Capitol, and they're gonna have a resolution for the Rona, calling it Rona Remembrance Day in New York, and we're gonna play the film there. It's gonna be a nice event for the day in Albany, New York. Man, we're like a business here.
I know.
We gotta tell
we have stuff
group,
happening.
Yeah. But thanks for everybody for being here. Thanks to you who support the film in any way. We appreciate it. It's been a lot of fun for us to get to see all of you when we do this, and we'll probably do another one down the road. So stay in touch.